Last week, I highlighted how the left and right embellish their narrative in order to assert their position in a better light. The use of statistics with gun violence are fast and loose and cherry-picked from both sides. Abortion, another hot-button topic, has more solidified statistics, but depending on which side of the aisle you stand, the proponent of quality of life and sanctity of life is prioritized. Let's get this out of the way. Nearly every biologist, embryologist, and geneticist agree that life begins at fertilization, with a few fringe outliers that deny that. There it is, end of discussion, right? If it were only that easy. The hard pill to swallow is we already choose quality of life more often than we think. And settle in, right-leaners. It happens just as much on that side of the aisle, just in a more passive way, and in a sense that absolves one from culpability. This no more apparent than the current COVID-19 pandemic and the use of masks and vaccines. The consensus of virologists and physicians affirm the success of these measures in protecting lives. There's no doubt that when I stated the majority of specialists, with the exception of a few, concur that life starts at conception, you agreed wholeheartedly. So in ignoring that same scientific consensus with vaccines and masks, it just undermines one's principles in favor of a narrative. And this scenario can be flipped towards the left with the use of pro-choice and vaccine mandates. Okay, well, what about the notion that abortion is a direct knowledge of that termination of life in favor for quality of life? Well, don't we do that already? I know I enjoy a juicy, well-marbled, medium-rare ribeye steak. And we, as society, have no problem setting traps for rodents, hunting for sport, or even hunting for population control on some species of life. Oh wait. That life doesn't count. They're beneath us, right? Well, we also allow for euthanasia and assisted deaths for humans with terminal disease or those in a vegetative state. So it seems we already put in place all of these workarounds to make us feel better about ourselves. Since we already have separated levels of life, scenarios where death is acceptable, and that our personal quality of life is important, which isn't bad. It is our innate ability to recognize the significance of life based on our own experiences, but these cannot be projected onto the unborn with an overabundance of what-ifs. The narrative that those women that choose abortion are despicable is absolutely unfounded, and a direct result of propaganda and arrogant thinking. The reason women have an abortion is, that's none of our business. You know, like why it's no one else's business why you need 72 ARs and 1 million rounds of ammo. Your business is yours, mine is mine. But more than 50% of all women who do choose to abort are already using some form of contraception, which shatters the notion of them being irresponsible. The left, however, cannot exactly trolley into this battle with a continued narrative of hiding behind an almost completely accepted form of abortion, like those in cases of rape and incest, as they only make up less than 1%. Even with the other widely accepted forms, when fatal or fetal abnormalities are present, or when the mother's life is in danger, that still only comprises less than 2% of all abortions. It's clearly a choice of worth, and not out of necessity. And to clear up a few other misconceptions, or straight up lies. For one, a fetus does not feel pain until at least 24 weeks. There has been rigorous scientific studies on this. Mechanical transmission and reception of signals through stimuli can occur earlier, but the recognition of pain itself requires much more development, which is typically later in the third trimester. And contrary to popular belief from the right, less than 1% of all abortions occur after 20 weeks, well before the cognition of pain. And ironically enough, it is in this 1% that most are due to the more widely accepted forms of abortion, such as fatal and fetal abnormalities and health threats to the mother. So 99% of all abortions, the fetuses harbor much less cognitive function than those in a vegetative state that we are willing to terminate with peace of mind. But these are logic-driven and moral arguments. The real argument should revolve around the legality and the effects of complete abortion bans. The US has had a history of legal abortion dating into our colonial times. Despite the moniker, Puritans may not have been so pure. The termination of a pregnancy was an accepted practice back then, so long as it occurred before the quickening, which is the first noticeable movement of the fetus. This typically occurs between 16 and 20 weeks. Our country was formed, and still no laws banning abortion. Some began sprouting up here and there. But it wasn't until the Victorian era, 100 years later, that this practice was fully frowned upon. And interesting enough, it wasn't directed at the moral reason, though it was later, but aimed at the worry that upper-class women were choosing to have children later in life and limiting the family size. This was on the heels of newly freed slaves and during the surge of a large influx of poor European immigrants that threatened a societal shift. I suppose if you can't beat them, I'll breed them. It wasn't for another 100 years through political, legal, and yes, even religious advocacy that abortion was legalized with the inception of Roe v. Wade. So what would happen if abortion bans were implemented? Well, they would still occur. Just like gun-free zones don't work, neither will abortion bans. They'll just be less safe and riskier. Not to mention the enormous burden that would incur on the taxpayer. About 50% of abortions occur by those below the poverty line, and another 26% are at or hovering just above that line. And a staggering 85% of abortions involve single women. Meaning the complete ban of abortion would contribute to the rise in a welfare state. And with a Republican response to ban abortion with no alternative, along with their history of callous response to immigrant children of those seeking refuge, and the blind eye directed at our own adoption challenges, it would almost certainly be a death blow to the party, as more people would require government assistance and vote for those who would implement that. As far as the religious implications, there are none. No laws shall be inherent of any religious influence. This because of a strict adherence to the separation of church and state. This is to protect our right to worship whoever we wish, without effect from others we do not. Imagine the most disagreeable religion influencing law. And that's why it should never happen. So, we've discussed pretty much everything, but what about the liberty stance? After all, I am the liberty pirate. Well, it comes down to choice. And you could be pro-choice or pro-life. There is no wrong answer. It's a sensitive subject. It's a personal subject. But government shouldn't interfere with a woman's choice. The government already doesn't recognize a fetus as a citizen, as no tax exemptions or tax credits are issued to a fetus, and citizenship isn't granted until after birth. Just imagine the implications of conception of life correlating with citizenships. If you think immigration is bad now, wait until all you have to do is get knocked up here. But it still all comes down to choice, and the government staying out of our business. The good news is that with sex education, accessibility of contraceptives, and like it or not, programs like Planned Parenthood, abortions have decreased by 22% in the past 10 years. I tend to get that smug response of, well, I noticed that 100% of people who defend abortion weren't aborted. Well, the truth is, had I been aborted, oh well, that would have been my mother's choice. I never would have known, I would have no recollection, and I couldn't care. So, cognitive and sentient emotions couldn't be quantified for my own existence. So there you go. Probably the two most contentious issues that face the political battlegrounds and draw people to vote. Both pro-gun and pro-choice protected by the 2nd and 14th Amendments, respectively. I'm sure I pissed off both sides, but that's liberty. Accepting the freedoms of others to do what we disagree with, and protecting the freedoms of individual liberties.